My guest today, Dr. David Montague, is a professor at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. Though his PhD is in political science, it is the subject of his master's degree that intrigues me. Dr. Montague has a master's from the George Washington University in Crime and Commerce. Along with being a professor of criminal justice on the UALR campus, he is also helping students as the Associate Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs. Dr. Montague's education may have been narrow in focus, but his career has been broad, requiring him to live and work in many states. To name a few interesting jobs, he worked 14 years in law enforcement as intelligence and investigator for the United States Drug Enforcement, DEA. This is not busting kids for pot. It is a national criminal investigations on prescription drugs and chemicals, along with asset forfeiture, taking stuff purchased with drug money from criminals. He has also worked in the fraud department of Chevy Chase Bank, and my favorite, again for the United States government, he served as senior investigator on the JFK Assassination Records Review Board. Y'all, today we're going to find out who shot JFK. It is my pleasure to welcome to the table the curious, educated, service-minded professor and author, Dr. David Montague. Hey, doctor.
Hello. Good afternoon. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me and for that wonderful introduction.
You are welcome. After reading about your education, I couldn't help but wonder if you know Dr. Chris Jones, who just recently ran for governor, because he went to Morehouse, I think.
I do know Chris Jones, and yes, and he did go to Morehouse. He went to MIT as well. I do know him pretty well. He's a fabulous guy, family man.
Educated.
Really community-oriented. In fact, my child, now college student, actually worked during the pandemic at the Arkansas Innovation Hub when he was head of that as a volunteer. And I just really loved it there. So I have a lot of admiration for Dr. Chris Jones.
I felt like y'all would know each other and run kind of in the same circles because you're both really smart and you've had higher education. So a political science degree, I understand, and that's kind of typical. I mean, a lot of people have political science degrees. But a master's in crime and commerce is very different and interesting. How did you even know about this degree to even pursue it?
Wow, that's a great question. You know, I've done a lot of interviews, and I don't think anyone's ever asked me specifically that one about that program. And it's interesting because that program at the George Washington University.
Yeah, you got to put the D in there.
Right, and I'm originally from the Washington, D.C. area. I say roots here in Arkansas. I used to come and visit growing up all my life. I was looking for something for a graduate level criminal justice program, and it turned out I was studying white collar. I was working at DEA at the headquarters building as a contractor at the time before I had jumped the fence to join the feds.
Now wait, when you were young?
Yeah, when I was in my 20s.
Okay.
I worked as a contractor. That's how I first got into the Drug Enforcement Administration.
So you had been already out of school, political science,
right,
and got a job.
And
then kind of started learning about this. Okay.
Right. So I was working, dealing with asset forfeiture. I had been going to Quantico for classes, and then, got certified, or, it's called instructor development, to teach asset forfeiture at Quantico's the FBI Academy, for your listeners.
I was wondering what that was.
Yeah, sorry.
Sounds like a bear from Australia.
in the news shows, TV shows and movies, they call it, the Quantico, but it's the FBI Academy. It's on the Marine base in Quantico, Virginia. And so was looking for a criminal justice focused graduate program, a master's program, and looked around, lived in the Washington, D.C. area, and found this really unique program that focused on white-collar crime that happened to be in a forensic science department. And I said, well, that's kind of unusual. So, the courses were also different from, I think, a normal master's, in criminal justice, mostly conspiracy, terrorism, fraud and government contracting, computer forensics, those things of that nature.
Yeah.
And most of the people that were my classmates were also and I joined the government during that time too, going through basic training. Most of my classmates were also investigators in other agencies, so NASA, Army,
You just don't think of all the areas of crime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it's interesting that program or that department had 3 tracks in forensic science. One was straight forensics. So you had a lot of chemistry people, toxicology, serology, and epidemiology type folks. Then they had security management. So you had a lot of people that did, nowadays you call, the computer security, cybersecurity people. And then the other was crime and commerce. And that was people like me, and that was the white collar side. So, you dipped a little bit into all the other 2 areas, but the focus of mine were conspiracy, terrorism, fraud, things and I ended up using a lot of those things when I went to the assassination board later.
Oh, I can't wait to talk about the JFK assassination, but we're going to keep everybody waiting on that. So then you go to the Morehouse College for then you go to Howard University for political science. So you go back and get more degrees. Why did you go after you got your master's in crime and commerce? Why did you go get a PhD in political science?
So I finished the master's degree. I had gone to, when I went through basic training at Quantico, I was assigned to Newark, New Jersey with DEA. And I worked in the Newark field office doing white-collar drug cases, pharmacies, doctors, nurses, chemical.
You don't ever think about them as being the crime or the criminals. You think of the guy that's living in the ghetto selling drugs to poor people.
Well,
but there's all kinds of white-collar crimes like that.
So, a lot of focus that we did, now, people think of OxyContin
right.
and that, the oxycodone crisis. A lot of that back then, people thought of it just soccer moms and people that got hooked going to pain doctors, things like that. But, thank goodness for the state and local law enforcement folks. They were really the ones that really put that type of criminality out there at the forefront. And now it's really been adopted more. But thankfully, the state and local folks did. But, to your question, I really had enjoyed what I was doing at George Washington. Could not, at that time, we didn't have high-quality distance learning in most places.
Yeah.
We're talking about the, early to mid-'90s. And so I ended up getting transferred or assigned to Newark, New Jersey. Took some classes at Rutgers University, or we call it Rutgers, up there in Newark. And I liked the program, but it wasn't the same focus. And then came back to Washington, D.C. to be able to finish that program at George Washington University, and did. And it just so happened that while I was trying to finish that program, that's how I got on board with the Assassination Records Review Board. It started the process when I was still in DEA, but the security clearance was so high, they had to redo my top secret again, plus they had to do an SCI to attach to it. And that just took a long time. So I was already back in the Washington, D.C. area. Thankfully, I was able to get back into George Washington. Got picked up by the review board, and that's how I ended up finally, after meeting people at the Assassination Board, deciding I wanted to do a PhD, because a lot of them had PhDs. The person that ran our Secret Service team had a PhD.
Oh,
the CIA
peer pressure. You just couldn't be outdone.
I loved working with them, and I said to myself, you know what? This wasn't on my radar. Just being a college graduate was going to be a big deal. Then I had this desire to get a master's, and then finally something said, well, David, just for yourself, why not try it? And that's the reason I actually went on a journey to kind of pray about it, to be honest with you. And drove in my Jeep Wrangler down to Alabama and Florida for a week and a half, and came back and applied and got in to Howard University. And then when I finally got accepted, I resigned and ended up becoming a consultant doing national security work while I was at Howard.
A calling. It was a calling.
It was. It really was.
I interviewed a nun, and she said, when whoever your religious person is you look up to, when you pray about it and it keeps calling and calling and calling, you cannot deny it.
Can't deny it.
So did you take top secret files home with you?
No, I did not. No.
How timely.
No.
Were your parents in law enforcement?
No. In fact, I grew up, my father left when I was about 9 weeks old, and so my mother and my grandmother raised me. My grandmother sold her hair business here in Arkansas. I moved up to help my mother raise me in the Washington, D.C. area. And my mother was not in law enforcement. She was an engineer. She's known as Arkansas's hidden figure. She's the one that's credited with designing the first U.S. naval ship with a computer.
And you wrote a book. And you wrote a book.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's it.
And that's your mother?
That's my mother.
That's
Yeah.
cool.
And
Raye Montague?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so,
So she's smart like you. You got your smarts from her.
I got smarts from her. Yeah, I think so.
Do you
And
know your dad?
I knew him, yeah.
Is he smart?
He died the day before I went to Quantico for basic training.
Oh, what basic training?
For DEA.
Oh, okay. Yeah, for DEA.
Yeah.
So we've already talked about what you did straight out of school. You worked a long time in law enforcement on a federal level.
Right.
So tell us about that time. Interesting drug investigations?
It was. I think working for DEA, I was, young person. The money was I thought pretty good. I enjoyed it.
Do you sit at a desk?
Part of the time, but you're out in the field a lot too. I liked it because I had a lot of control over my schedule. That was important to me. I got a chance to really hone my skills and apply my attention to things in a very detailed way, like macro level, or micro level. I also liked it because being an investigator is a lot about collaboration, and I like working with other people. I'm a people person. You can probably tell I'm not very shy, and those types of things bode well for someone who does investigations.
What was the most exciting bust you ever did?
Well, off the top of my head, I think an interesting case was a psychiatrist that had he had a practice at a hospital in New York, and he had another practice in his home. He lived in a brownstone, I think it was in Queens, and then he had another practice in New Jersey, in Newark, where he would come 2 days a week. I'm not going to mention the persons. I could, but anyway. He had another practice in New Jersey, and at that time, there were not that many states that had what were called prescription monitoring programs, and that's where if you go to the doctor and they write you a prescription, take it to the pharmacy, then the pharmacy would then send a copy of it just for record keeping for types of drugs that are being prescribed, not about the individuals, to the state. And so New Jersey did not have one of those programs. New York did. So he intentionally went to New Jersey to have a practice, and in each day he would go to New Jersey. He was in a retail storefront. He would see between 150 to 200 people in a few hours.
Whoa.
Multiple people in an exam room at a time. He did not have any nurses. He only had armed security guards, and he had 2 waiting rooms. One was cash and one was Medicaid. So seeing that case come through and being there in the courtroom to see this person who, with their education, took advantage of known addicts and literally had them lined around the corner of Broad Street in Newark, New Jersey. It's a main strip,
Was
track.
this before the kickback from drug companies, or was he making money on kickback from drug companies for selling meeting quotas for giving?
He was selling prescriptions for cash.
Oh, he was selling prescriptions for cash.
Yeah. And I wanted to say they're between $30 or $50 a prescription. And, back then Ritalin was really hot, big, very popular, and Xanax.
Yeah, what year was this?
So I guess I was like around 92, 93.
So cocaine was over. That was the 80s.
So to speak.
Cocaine cowboys were over. So what's the most disappointing outcome of your career that you worked on and it never came through? Or was there ever one?
You mean turn to law enforcement work, investigative work?
Yeah, at that time.
Well, I think one of the things that really struck me, that was frustrating, I think that's an easy way for me to do it then, with respect to the drug enforcement work, I was frustrated on the white-collar side. I really understood and believed that somebody that has, a significant amount of education and experience, and they know better. They know better than to take advantage of those who have the addiction. That's not. We used to say it's not the same as Joe the crackhead in an alley. This is a person that's maybe doing this work to earn extra vacation or whatever they're doing. And they've already got this. In the case of the example I mentioned, he already had a good practice at a hospital. He had a practice at home as well, and it's just a third side business just to get extra cash, So for me, I found it very disappointing that the guidelines set up for people convicted of those crimes seemed to be very minimal.
And white collar crimes.
Yeah, and that really always disappointed me.
Have they changed it?
I mean, some things have changed, but I've been out of the business for a little while. I was very disappointed. I would say in terms of the Assassination Board, I've told others that I worked 2 years with that agency, 95 to 97, and I really put my heart into it, just like other people that worked at the agency. And I went in there with the sole intention of doing my best to try to identify records, try to negotiate, transfer, try to help give people a voice to speak on how they felt and why they didn't feel comfortable initially talking about the assassination, and being able to centralize those things at the National Archives and Records Administration and NARA, or the archives, in Washington, D.C., or in College Park, Maryland. That's where the JFK collection is. And I don't feel that enough was done to really make sure that all of those things were done very quickly.
All right, this is a great place to take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Dr. David Montague, Professor of Criminal Justice and Associate Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs on the University of Arkansas campus at Little Rock. Still to come, the long-awaited answer to the question, who shot JFK, which we just talked about a little bit. Dr. Montague's opinion on drug crime in America, imported and prescription, and about some of the books he's authored. For instance, the award-winning book about his mother, Raye Montague, the woman who revolutionized naval engineering. We'll be back after the break. Okay, Dr. David Montague, your resume says, I love that name, Montague. I think I'm going to adopt that name.
Oh, Lord.
What is that, French? Is that French?
I hear. I don't know. People call me Montgomery. I get Montesquieu. I get everything. So
Montague. It sounds like a Walt Disney character to me. Anyway, I don't know why we're talking about that. Your resume says, Dr. Montague, your resume says you served as a senior investigator on the JFK Assassination Records Review Board. Tell us all about that. You've been talking a little bit about that. What did you find out? Nothing. Sounds like nothing, because nobody would talk.
Actually, quite the opposite.
Good.
People love to talk about it.
Were they saying anything good?
Yes.
So Ruby did shoot JFK.
Oh, well, wait a minute. So we know Ruby shot Oswald on live TV.
I mean, right. Ruby shot Oswald. Did Oswald shoot JFK?
So that is something that if you want my personal belief, I don't know how, because the Warren Commission, and for your listeners out there have been multiple investigations, federal agencies, that is, put together to examine and re-examine the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, also Attorney General Bobby Kennedy, or Robert Kennedy, and also Dr. Martin Luther King, which was the focus of not only the House Select Committee on Assassinations, but our agency as well. So the official findings of the Warren Commission in the Warren Report in 1963 was that, from that started in 1963, was that Oswald acted alone as the lone gunman, and during the 70s. There was material introduced during the House Select Committee on Assassinations, which was another reinvestigation into the assassination in the 70s. That's where there was material from audio evidence from one of the Dallas police motorcycles that was introduced. I believe it was by Robert Grodin, who was a consultant to the House Select Committee, HSCA, at that time. And so even though the HSCA did not determine that is proof of anything, the fact is that was the first time that I'm aware of that an alternative to the conspiracy theory was put in. Basically, that the audio evidence indicated that there might be an additional gunman. So my takeaway from my time there, based on the hundreds of people that I interviewed, the records that I've reviewed, I had to travel to a lot of different official government facilities and some other places to look at things and talk to people and negotiate things. I just don't know how Oswald could have done something like that by himself.
Well, he had to be hired by somebody.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of information that's there at the archives. We went through all of his personal belongings. We went through the material from when he was in custody, right after the assassination. And then We also looked at the material that was done on him for the documentaries that were done.
What about the cop? So what did the motorcycle cop say about it?
Well,
you mentioned him, that his testimony came up during your time.
Well, there was actually audio recording evidence that was introduced. That's what I'm saying too.
Oh.
And so there were many people that said that they thought they heard additional shots. And so part of the reason that there was another investigation beyond the Warren report was that a lot of people, once the Warren report was released, said that they gave evidence to people. They had photos. They gave statements. They were in Dealey Plaza. That's in Dallas, Texas, Dealey Plaza, and that those reports or records did not appear in the official Warren report.
Oh, somebody.
Oh, many people said that, and then I ran into a few people who also acknowledged that during my time, just corroborated in some cases. And remember, this is 20 years ago this happened for me to do these interviews, but some of them still stand out. But a lot of that we documented in our official findings that are available publicly in the official report that was submitted by the Assassination Board to President Clinton, who was president at the time. And so there were a lot of people that I think it's important for anyone that is not familiar with the complexity and the scale of that assassination, that event in American history compared to others. I have compared it to 9/11 in some ways because, 9/11, people know where they were when it happened. People were terrified. There was a 9/11 commission put together. It was a federal agency. That's the 9/11 commission. Mm-hmm. When you think of the JFK assassination, people who were there, they know. I mean, I interviewed so many people that broke down in tears. And for one thing, I was able to let them know officially, and we went through the transition technology-wise from faxing documents to attaching documents to email during my tenure, because it was mid-'90s at that point, And so there were a lot of people that were pleased to know that there was nothing for them to feel like they couldn't say.
That is nice.
Right.
So you're saying, though, that there were more papers given and interviews done at that time that weren't all given to the Warren Commission. So there was a cover-up of some sort.
Well, what I'm saying is that even at the time that the Warren report was released, and mind you, this is the 1960s, and even when we were doing our work in the 1990s, and I can only attest to the fact that I spoke with a lot of people that said that they had turned over statements and records
and you didn't have
photos them. And that they were not ever put in the official record. So they were actually pleased to be able to know that we had.
Did you find them anywhere?
There's some things that we have found that we already knew about, but there's some other things, of course, that we did not. I think one of the things that's important for your listeners and viewers is to know that our mandate was quite different from the previous investigative
You think
agencies.
it was cover-up, or you think it was sloppy recording, sloppy?
I think that there were a lot of things that were, you mean talking about in 1963?
Yeah, all those statements that didn't get recorded. Do you think that was a cover-up of some kind, or do you think that was just sloppy police work?
I don't know if I call it sloppy police work.
You think it was a cover-up?
I do.
Say it. Just say it.
I do think there was a lot going on that day. There was a lot happening. I do think that there, and of course, there are going to be some people that say they had things, but how do you test the veracity of those things?
We know Oswald shot, and we know that Ruby came out and shot Oswald to keep him from not talking. I was alive, actually, during this time. Were you, David, alive?
No, I was born in 66.
So I was alive. I'll tell you where I was, because you're exactly right. We all know where we were. I was sitting in class, and the principal of my grade school came over the intercom crying and said, "Our this has just been shot. Everybody go home."
Right.
And we all walked home. So you're right. Everybody does remember where they were, and then we're all at home watching TV, and there's no DVR, and there's just real time.
Right.
And I'm watching it, and Ruby comes out and shoots Oswald right there in front of me and my mother, and I thought my mother was gonna lose it. She was like, "He just got shot! He just got shot!" I mean, there was just me and Mom at the house, and she didn't have another adult to talk to about it.
Right.
And so that part we all know is true, but what we don't know is who hired Oswald, and who do we? Did Ruby ever say who hired him? To shoot Oswald?
So what I'm saying is, we don't have any. The Warren Commission said Oswald was a lone gunman.
But he's not. So we don't
And some have
know.
said that Oswald was not a gunman at all. And so there are multiple. And one of the things I think was interesting about the work that we did was, we had to look at multiple, avenues and multiple angles of this thing. Such as multiple Oswald theory, the belief that there were multiple people that were living that life as Oswald or Oswald-like, if you will, to be able to maintain official records in different places, be able to work in certain patterns or operate in certain patterns. There's still so much controversy about his defection, so-called, to the Soviet Union, and how did he get back in the country? What was going on with him while he was in the Soviet Union? I mean, I did a podcast not too long ago with Ernst Tidovets, who is a friend of Oswald's in Belarus.
What's the name of that podcast?
It was the PDB podcast.
Okay.
Patrick David
Okay, we'll have to put that on the website.
in Fort Lauderdale. Yeah.
And so what did he? So Oswald was connected to the Soviet Union.
Oswald left the United States and went to the Soviet Union, and then that's where he became his wife, Marina Oswald. They had a baby, and they came back to the United States, and that seemed kind of unusual at the time to be able to get your family to be able to come back around the same period of time. What connections might you have? What was this connection to people like industrialists like George de Mohrenschildt? It's like, that's like, what's the guy that owns
Who's that?
Tesla?
Elon Musk.
Elon
Yeah.
Musk.
It's like me buddies with Elon Musk, It's
Yeah,
like,
how did he end up doing that?
and then and George de Mohrenschildt, who was visited by, I guess, my equivalent during the days of the HSCA in the 70s, was found dead in his home later on that day after.
Who was found dead in their home?
George de Mohrenschildt.
And how was he connected? He was the Elon Musk guy.
He was an industrialist.
Interesting.
I just used Elon Musk, but not Elon Musk.
But that also had to
Yeah.
do with Russia. That was connected to Russia. Also, was
Well,
he?
what I'm saying is there were so many different
Wow, I wonder.
angles connected to the enigma that I call Lee Harvey Oswald in his life, and some question whether he was really just a patsy and not really a gunman at all. So, I have no proof of that, and our mandate was not to decide who killed the president. Our mandate was really quite different, which actually made it more, easier for folks to want to work with us, because we weren't set up to just decide who killed the president. We were set up to provide a centralized way and a process for people to openly contribute, donate materials to the National Archives.
but not to make a decision.
Well, the idea was that decisions have been made for the American people by previous agencies. So when Senator John Glenn, the astronaut John Glenn, wrote the Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992 and got it passed and became law that created our agency, the intention was, let's have a different focus. The movie JFK had just come out the year before, Oliver Stone movie, and so many people were incensed. So he said, I know where I was when the president was assassinated, and I don't feel that the people have done enough to release the records, and I don't want the government telling me what I need to believe about this. And so our mandate was quite simple, was to have full, unquestioned authority to be able to identify what we determined to be an assassination-related record, to be able to go after those records, and to have full negotiation authority to convert those into records at the National Archives.
So they're public now.
Everything that we found is over at the National Archives. There are still some things that have not been released. And so that, going back to your earlier question.
Do you know what it is? Have you seen it?
I've gone a few times back. I mean, back when I was at the agency, I had, all of us, not me being special, but all of us had, I hate to use the word unfettered, access to all of the material. But, if you're on the other hand, like coming on the other side of the fence, being a assassination researcher, someone writing a book or doing a paper or a documentary, the access is very limited. For us working at the agency, we just had scan cards and walk right through the doors. Like, for instance, when I arranged us being able to go examine the Zapruder film, I didn't think it was a big deal. We all had full access. I just
Examine the what?
The Zapruder film, the Abraham Zapruder film, is part of the most well-known film of the assassination.
Oh.
Yeah, the Oliver Nix film is also pretty well known too, and there's currently a lawsuit associated with that, so I won't get into that one. But the Zapruder film is the one that became so controversial that after I left the Assassination Board to go finish my PhD, it was all over the news in terms of who owns the Zapruder film. Does the government own it? Should a private entity own it? Should be like an archive or something.
When was the I can't even say that word, film recorded or
in Dealey Plaza during the assassination, and
it's the film of
it's the actual film.
Yeah, Abraham. So if you've seen the movies about the assassination, it's the one that most
That's the
people.
name of that film.
Right, and that viewpoint of the limousine coming down Dealey Plaza, Abraham Zapruder up on the pergola, up on the steps of the pergola, and being able to get help from his assistant actually to be able to film. I believe it was 8mm, and then you see the limousine go in front of what's called it was on the other side when you read it, it said Stemmons Freeway, because it was going to the triple overpass, and that's where and so that's part of the question. That's the film where you've seen people make jokes like on Jerry Seinfeld. Is it from the back or to the left or back?
Yeah, because you can't tell which way his head goes.
Right. So if you believe it came from the book depository, then it came this way. But if you believe it was another conspiracy, then it might have been coming from here. I don't think Oswald could have done it by himself. And I have interviewed people like James Tague, who was at the triple underpass further down past the Stemmons Freeway sign. He said he was hit by debris. And he kept that debris. I interviewed him in 1995.
So you think John F. Kennedy was shot twice?
I think there was more than one shooter.
How many times do you think JFK was shot? Actually,
I don't know.
Made contact. Okay.
I don't know, but I did look. I did do a look just like other people did. I did a search for the president's brain. That was inconclusive. I went back to Archives 1. The JFK collection's in Archives 2. That's in College Park, Maryland. I went to Archives 1. That's if you've ever seen movies like National Treasure, that movie, the U.S. Constitution is at Archives 1 in Washington, D.C.
I'm going to go watch Nixon again by Oliver Stone again.
Yeah.
I am. I'm always looking for something new to watch. That's a good one. I'm going to go watch that again. I haven't seen it since it came out 1,000 years ago. So we're pretty sure then that he was not acting alone. Now the last question, and before we move on, I know I'm beating this to death, but do you think it was? I always thought it was the mafia that was after JFK, but now you're saying you think maybe he was Russian plant.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay.
I didn't say that. What I said was I looked at multiple angles, just like...
That was one angle that I've never thought about. But everybody always thinks that Bobby and him were killed by the mafia.
Well, that's another angle that was put out there.
What do you think about that angle?
I think it's really interesting, looking, my understanding of the of the federal government during that time was that there was not a public acknowledgement that organized crime was actually real, and quite frankly, I think that was kind of a joke because everybody knew it was real, We did look at some people. It's in our official report. We did look at some people who were known to be connected with organized crime, and I did have to travel to some places and look at some records. We do know of certain people that, also connecting, with Castro, we're anti-Castro Cubans, Rolando Masferrer, and
so
the
you
car
think
bombings.
Bobby being shot and John being shot are the same two groups that shot him? I never thought of them as being the same one. I always thought Bobby's was just kind of impassioned. Somebody just shot him because he was too liberal or something.
Well, I don't know that I can say that they're the same people. There are some assassination researchers out there that have dedicated many years, decades.
Do they think it's the
to
same
looking.
group?
There are several theories regarding the assassination of Bobby Kennedy. We did look through some of those records. I do not know which ones of those have been released, so I can't speak to those. I do know that we did look through some of the Martin Luther King records, and I will say, I think for the record, that being a Morehouse College graduate, that's the same college that Martin Luther King graduated. So that really became surreal for me to look at records in their true form and be able to see. And the same thing with the president. I mean, just imagine being a 28-year-old sitting in a room at the National Archives, and they bring out, you know, the First Lady's pink outfit and the president's suit, and they bring out, you know, Commission Exhibit 399, that's known as the Magic Bullet for your listeners, and so and the rifle, the Mannlicher Carcano rifle, and then, you know, going through and looking at these autopsy photos and X-rays. I'm like 28. That's like my first week on the job, and I'm like, whoa, this is the president of the United States brain. I mean, the brain of record, you know. So I don't know if that was the actual brain.
I bet that was surreal.
Yeah.
You know, it would have to be Russia to be able to kill so many people and not get caught.
You know, they're falling out of windows all the time over there.
That's what I mean. That's exactly
Sorry,
what
we won't go
All
that
right,
way.
we've got to
We
take
won't
a
go
break. We got to get off this subject. We got a lot more to cover. All right, we come back. We'll continue our conversation with Dr. David Montague, Professor of Criminal Justice and Associate Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs at the University of Arkansas on the Little Rock campus. Still to come, I want to ask about fentanyl, why some pills kill you and why they don't. I want to understand the psyche of criminals and why we all love crime shows so much. And I want to ask you about the Idaho 4. You know what I'm talking about, those college kids. Yep, we got to ask about all of that. And crime against senior, prison reform, advice for young women. We're not going to get to it all.
Oh my gosh.
All right. I know. We'll be back in just a minute. So let's talk about fentanyl, the pill. It was legally produced for pain, but now it's being given to people all over. Some people take a pill and do fine. Some people take a pill and it kills them. I don't understand that. What is going on with fentanyl?
Anytime you're talking about any controlled substance, you know, how it's used, it can be easily abused, just even with aspirin and analgesic.
So I know
take 13 of them, you have a problem, right?
Right,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
have a liver problem. So, I mean, I know you're not in that business anymore, and you probably got out of that business because now you're a teacher at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. But it is, wonder why is it not stable? Are the pills coming in from Mexico? Do you have an opinion about where are all these pills coming from that the kids are getting? They're not manufactured in the States, are they?
So I can't speak to what you're talking about, which is counterfeit drugs.
Counterfeit drugs.
And so that has been an issue for quite some time. I used to belong to an organization called the National Association of Drug Diversion Investigators, NADDI, NADDI. And so that was one of the things that organization looked at. It was a national issue then, still is now. And I know back when I used to go, in fact, went to a NADDI conference in, I believe it was St. Louis, while I was working at UALR here, and ran into some DEA investigators down there. But to your point, what I think a lot of, some of your viewers might not realize that while most of the drugs that they're used to purchasing, the prescription drugs, you know, I for one am one of those people that was responsible for being part of the regulated chain of drugs, is what it's called, and that's where you have an import-export potentially. If the raw material could be raw pseudoephedrine, it comes in from maybe China or some other country, comes in, it's in a big barrel, and then it's imported to a company, an American company. It's gone through all the proper taxing stamps, all that kind of stuff. Everything's legitimate. And then you have to turn that from a powder or crystal form into actual pills or tablets. Mm-hmm. There's a manufacturing process associated with that. And that can be, you know, examined by investigators. And we used to look for what's called theoretical assays of how many pills should you yield from that original barrel. And that's one of the ways you can tell, like, are things okay or not. So you know that there's only a certain amount of pills or tablets that can be produced by X company in a given year, right?
Oh, okay.
So, you know, you go to, and so when the markings, we call that drug ballistics, that are on the pills or tablets, you'll see little stamps, numbers, you know, indentations. Those things are there for a reason. They're there to let you know of the purity, the quality, that that's the actual thing that your doctor prescribed, or the generic. And if you look on the pill bottle, you'll see a description. You can easily go online and look for information to know whether what you're taking is real. However, it is important for listeners to know that for a very, very long time, there have been a lot of people in other countries and in our country that are producing counterfeit drugs. That's not a secret. And what I saw when I went to the Natty conference years ago, they had some teenagers that were on the stage, and they were all in drug rehab programs. And most of them just acknowledged that their assumption is if they buy it off the internet, that it must be real.
Yeah.
They believe if it's on the internet, someone must have checked things, regulated things, and that's not true.
I feel like that's the opposite of true.
Never
trust the internet.
Well, I think that people become savvier now, but
that's true. That's true.
And if you think about the impact of people that don't have health insurance, and are going out to try to find a lower cost of the same drug, they don't know if it's counterfeit.
But that's not what's killing the kids. They're buying that fentanyl pills on the street, I guess. I don't know.
I mean, if you think about a regular illegal drug, that's cut or mixed with something, like cocaine, like street, like cocaine, you don't know what it's been cut with. I remember we did an investigation once when I was in Newark, New Jersey, and we had to go and audit a manufacturer that produced cocaine hydrochloride, for surgical, and that was like 97% pure.
Did you steal some?
On the street. Of course, if I had stuck my finger in it, that would have killed me if I had a cut on my finger.
Are you serious?
But yeah. But I mean, if you when you're dealing with something that you buy on the street, you don't know what it's mixed with or what. And same thing with buying the prescription medication. Just because you buy a pill on the street doesn't mean.
So do you think drug commerce is helping or hurting our economy?
I think drug commerce is actually very helpful. If David Montague's personal opinion, I do think the pricing of drugs, needs to be looked at. I think that, you want companies to be able to make money, and you think of at the same time, you think of the number of folks that just, if they aren't fortunate enough to have access to health care, to be able to get their hands on medication that they need. And I have been in pharmacies where I'm fortunate to have really good health coverage where I work, and I've been in the pharmacy here in Little Rock, and the person in front of me, and I've seen multiple people in different pharmacies over the years. I've been here 18 years. Will just say, no, I can't afford to get that one. I'll have to, because it's $300 for them or $500.
So you do so much social work for so many things. Are you going to start getting on that board to try to fix all of the drug problems? You're so smart. I think you could fix it all.
Well, thank you for the compliment.
You should work on drug reform for Arkansas.
Well, I was fortunate enough to be asked to testify twice for two different drug bills that were being considered to create a prescription monitoring program here in Arkansas. And actually, that prescription monitoring programs, that was the topic of my doctoral dissertation.
Oh, I was going to ask you what yours was.
I was looking at, does the organizational culture of the agency, the state agency that's monitoring what data are captured, make a difference in terms of what those states do with those data. And so I went to the first two states in America that had computerized prescription monitoring programs. It was all like paper, like if you had like multiple copy forms, like the yellow canary, pink, and the green. It was replacing that with computers. So I went to Oklahoma and I went to Massachusetts, and I looked at Massachusetts had a public health agency running that program, and I went to Oklahoma and they had a law enforcement agency. So they had narcotics agents doing the same thing. They were using the same technology, the same third-party company to collect the prescription data. It just happened to be the same company had contracts with them. And then all I needed to do was just see what they do with it. And what I found was in Massachusetts, I saw in Massachusetts that they were more often than not working toward getting people into treatment. And in Oklahoma, that was their job. They're more using the data to help make cases. But here's the real nuance about it for your listeners is don't assume that just because people work in a profession that they're one-sided only. What I learned from that experience was that in both states, both of them independently said if they were the ones in charge of making such a body to look at prescription monitoring data, that they think it should be a board made up of multiple types of professions so that more angles like nursing, social work. And that's what I said to the legislature in Arkansas. So
maybe something will happen. So you've written numerous publications, one as a co-author of The Travesty of Justice, The Political of The Politics of Crack Cocaine and the Dilemma of the Congressional Black Caucus. What is the dilemma of the Congressional Black Caucus?
Well, it speaks to the 1980s, and there was a lot of time. At that time, crack was a huge thing, right? Huge. And Len Bias, who was a college basketball player with College Park, University of Maryland College Park, he had just gotten signed on to join the Boston Celtics, and he went out and he overdosed and died. But he died of powder cocaine.
Oh. What does that mean? He snorted too much? You mean his heart died, or what had happened?
So what they did in Congress, cocaine.
It made his heart race.
Yeah, and so what happened in Congress, because there had been numerous attempts to get increased emphasis on drug penalties.
Oh, I see.
Right? There had been, I believe Ronald Reagan was president at the time.
War on drug stuff.
The war on drug stuff.
Just say no.
There had been, and so when Len Bias died, when it was Tip O'Neill, who was Speaker of the House, and we went through the congressional records and interviewed, people there at the time. My co-author Artemisia Stanberry, who's in North Carolina. Hello, Artemisia. And what we learned was that on the floor in there in Congress, they basically said, we need to do something because Len Bias has died, and we need to do something about the scourge of crack cocaine. But he didn't die of a crack cocaine overdose.
Oh.
So you think of it as Jello in a mold or Jello in a box. It's still cocaine, but it's different forms. And so what came out, because there were at that time attempts to try to say, okay, should the difference between how you federally criminalize powder cocaine to crack cocaine, if you think of like a sugar packet versus a sweet and low packet, should you make it for every bit of packet of crack cocaine, should you have to have, one powder cocaine, or should you federally to get the same sentence, or should you have 5? Some people were throwing, and these are people in Congress just throwing out amounts without any real science behind it.
Right.
And the result came out that, and part of the dilemma of the Black Caucus, and some members of the Black Caucus were part of this. They didn't realize that they thought it was going to be a more realistic approach toward criminalization, but it turned out that people pushed so far with where they went, they ended up coming with a federal disparity of 100 to 1. So you would need 100 times as much powder cocaine to get the same sentence as 1 packet of crack cocaine, if you think of it like packets like that.
That is odd.
Which didn't make any sense at all.
Well, that's because those rich people were using cocaine, so they didn't want to do that.
Well, and to add insult to injury, the head of the U.S. Sentencing Commission at the time even testified and said, this doesn't make any sense. You're going to be putting people in prison for decades.
So how long did that law stay?
It changed when Obama was president.
Okay. Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah. He changed it to 18 to 1.
If you were poor and used crack, you went to jail for a long time. But if you were rich and used cocaine, you
powder cocaine, yeah.
Okay, that's I got it. All right, this is my favorite book I want to talk about. Overnight Code: The Life of this is your mother. The Life of Raye Montague, the woman who revolutionized naval engineering. And this book was featured on Good Morning America and received the 2022 Georgia Author of the Year Award for a biography. This book is good. It's got national recognition. Tell us about it.
I appreciate you asking about the book, and my co-author Paige Bowers, hey Paige, and she's at pagebowers.com. This book came out of a love for service to others. And so my mother really, had been raised in as she called it, the child of the Deep South. She had my grandmother, who was from Pine Bluff, Noble Lake area, told my mother growing up that she had 3 strikes against her. She was, African American. She was a girl at the time, became a woman, girl, and from the segregated South. And so, and there were a lot of stereotypes about what a Southern education and just coming from the South meant to people who were outside the South, and so that she should recognize that and understand that doesn't have to limit her, and that she would need to prepare herself. So my mother grew up around a lot of strong women, and was very adventurous. And when she was, and the book kind of came out of her talking about her experience as a child and, wanted to become a naval engineer or an engineer of any type. And then, of course, that not being something that girls and women were not encouraged to do.
And usually don't want to do.
Well, at that time, girls had to take home economics.
Well, and I did
in
love
school,
that.
And she wanted to take shop. And so my grandmother... fought the school system, on that one.
She get to take shop?
She ended up getting to take, and she ended up being able to test out of home economics. And so I think that was a lesson, one of the many lessons, as an example, for my mother to say, you don't ever have to take the first answer. And if you have a goal in mind, you might have to take a different path, but you still might be able to get there. But you got to put the work in. Right? And you got to have the acumen to be able to do a good job at what it is. So the book really came about because, she was on Good Morning America after being recognized as Arkansas's Hidden Figure.
Who was your mother?
Yeah, in 2017. And so we all went up there, and Janelle Monáe from the movie Hidden Figures was there, and Michael Strahan and Robert. Oh yeah, and of course my mom was trying to flirt with Michael Strahan and all
Good
kind
girl.
of stuff.
Good
It's like you're a
girl.
and my wife and my now college student was with us, and they actually. Good Morning America sent a limo down here to Arkansas because my mother couldn't fly at the time and drove us up there.
No way.
But the reason I bring it up is because after that Good Morning America debut, we got a call from a literary agent in New York. And so she called and said, I saw you on TV, has your mom ever thought about a book about her, about her? And so I put my mom on the phone and said, hey, are you interested? And my mother had been asked many times by people, you should do a book. But in my mother's mind, it was about her career. She not only developed the first naval ship with a computer, she went on to get the first woman to be a female program. She was the first woman to be program manager of ships, which is like a CEO of a company. At one point, she was in charge of all computers for the Navy. She was the first woman on the Numerical Control Society Board of Directors. That's like the technology that builds your headset, your phone, your computer, stuff like that. She's like a grandmother of the computer age, if you think of it that way. It's the difference between knowing how to operate your phone versus how to take it apart and put it together. And so because she didn't have access to the same academic program, because she never got a degree in computer science, right, or engineering, at that time when she went to college, Arkansas Fayetteville was the only state college that had a engineering baccalaureate program, and they did not accept minorities. They've acknowledged that when they posthumously gave her the Silas Hunt Award in 2018. And so she studied business. And she taught herself.
So she went to college.
She did go to college. Oh, she did very well in college. And then when
Which
immediately
college
to the
did
Navy.
she go to?
Now it's called UAPB, but back then it was AM&N. So she went to the Navy, first in D.C., put herself through night school to take classes to learn the circuitry of computers. And so she taught herself, was taught, the basics by watching. She had a really good memory. People on the machinery, and just when people weren't watching, she was just getting in and doing it. So getting back to the book, she was not for doing a book, and she literally would laugh and tell people nobody would be interested in a book about my career. And that's when the literary agent said, no, Ray, you need to understand, people need to know your story to know that through your career you have inspired others. So that's how she started the book with Paige Bowers. And then when she went into hospice, one of the things I promised her was that I would finish the book. So we did.
She's gone.
She passed in 2018.
Oh.
And so we did get the book, and literally she is the week that we got the contract with the publishing company, that's when she passed. And so Paige and I became a really close team, and actually doing the book was really a way to help me with the grieving process too.
Very cathartic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so we worked very well in that vein, and we have done a ton of book talks virtually and in person around the country.
When's the movie?
We did actually have a contract for movie rights at one point. That contract expired, so if anybody else out there wants to do a movie, you can let us know. We'll be happy to do that.
It will. It's going to happen.
Great story.
I think there's going to be Assassination Records Review Board, the movie, at one point. Our former agency.
There better be.
Really?
I would like to see that.
So you're going to be in 2 movies.
Oh, I don't know. Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
You'll have to come back on the radio if you are.
No.
All right, let's take our last break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with the interesting and very curious Dr. David Montague, Professor of Criminal Justice and Associate Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs on the University of Arkansas campus at Little Rock, and Raye Montague's son, because she's very important, the woman who revolutionized naval engineering. We'll be back. We're going to talk about some advice to young women to stay safe, and we're going to talk about Dr. David Montague's work with seniors and prison reform real briefly, and then that'll be it. We'll be right back.
Great job, Mom.
Thanks. Yeah, you're awesome. And you know, there's actually we have all of her papers in a collection through UALR at the Center for Arkansas History and Culture here in Little Rock.
Oh, I got to
And some students have been able to go and
That's so
do.
cool.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, that's the whole purpose. You know, I remember one of the things that she said was her goal in agreeing to do the book was that she knew her health was declining, and she just loved going out and doing public speaking. It gave her It hurt her because it was harder and harder every single time to recover. She physically was drained.
She wanted to pay forward her
life
knowledge.
force,
She wanted to pay forward what she'd learned. I think people do that at the end of their life. They're like, hey, I've learned all this shit. Let me tell it to you.
So the book
That's why
does
this radio show exists.
That's right.
Yeah.
Boom.
Tom, don't cut all that out just because we're on break. You put that right back in the show.
We can use it for a clip.
Yeah.
So before this last break, at the beginning, we talked about who shot JFK because Dr. Montague served on that research board or committee review board. And then we talked about his mother, who was the first woman to revolutionize naval engineering. And I have noticed that I thought was interesting is that most of the computer people that I hire that go to school for computers, they're good, don't get me wrong, but the ones that are self-taught, they have a passion for it, and they're really, really good. But now we're going to talk about, what he's doing now for seniors, crime against seniors. What are you working on? Don't you serve on, aren't you responsible for founding the University of Arkansas Little Rock Senior Justice Center to promote service and research on crime against older people? Is that a real problem, or is it just cyber?
Oh, no, it's a very real problem.
Is it like hitting them over the head or stealing their cane, or is it like cyber crime?
Well, I would say it runs the gamut, just like other types of criminality. One of the things I say was great about UA Little Rock or UALR is the fact that they really gave me as at that time, junior faculty member, the ability to be able to just find something and create it. And I said I wanted to have something that would benefit students at the same time. Mm-hmm. So it was a great way to be able to address a real problem. When you talk about gerocriminology is
what
another
is it?
way. Gerocriminology with a G. Gerocriminology. And there are scholars that are looking at that and what it means. A lot. There are some people that think it might just deal with like Medicare fraud or Medicaid. And
that's
Medicare,
what I would think. Yeah.
But a lot of it has to do with physical assault. It has to do with taking of pills. Sometimes it may even be family members, that are taking the pills from grandma's medicine cabinet. People that are fraud in terms of Medicare fraud in terms of the companies that will go in and try to get you to give them their information. And for instance, we did a project out in the Delta, and we went to, I think, Forest City, went to a facility out there, I won't name the facility, and we happened to have with us the head of the state of Arkansas's senior Medicaid Fraud Patrol, Medicaid Fraud Patrol, which is an actual agency in the state, and under DHS, to go out there. And we met some seniors and said, oh, just last week, this company, such and such company, came out and said, if we give them our names and bank account numbers, they'll give us free orthopedic shoes every month for a year. And they brought pizza and Coca-Cola and, and there's some people that grew up trusting. They leave the doors unlocked at home. They do the car doors unlocked.
Still?
Especially in these small towns,
Yeah, and just making, so a lot of what we did when we created the Senior Justice Center was to literally go out and talk to senior groups, talk
educate.
about, like Life Quest of Arkansas is a great one out in West Little Rock at Second Presbyterian Church. I used to serve on their board out there. And, they have these, classes, and we would go out and talk and bring students too and talk about, what are some things you could do at home? Don't open the door to say hello. You talk through the door. But here's the other part that I think is important. We would also go out and train people who were medical professionals and other types of professionals that worked with seniors to make sure they understood the signs. And we would talk to people who had, and I dealt with this when my mother was in assisted living. Yeah. I lived through this. Making sure that, like little tips, like making sure you show up at all times of the night at the facility, so that don't ever have a set pattern.
So that so you can see what they're doing in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
So when you had to learn about all this criminology and stuff, did you have to get into the psyche of criminals? Is there something that sticks out in your mind that all criminals have?
I'm not an expert on the psyche of criminals. I just know that there's enough crime out there that there's some common sense tips that we use. I mean, some of the same tips would be things you tell a college student in a library, like don't use your purse as a placeholder and when you're sitting there going to get books or the bathroom, things of that nature. So I'm not an expert on the psyche of criminals, but I think it is important to, when there are specific types of events that happen, to try to bring in the right experts there. But I'm not an expert on the psyche of criminals.
What would you tell your daughter not to do or to look out for? If you had a daughter that was out there running around, she's social, she's college age, what would you tell her?
Well, obviously being careful on social media and helping to try to define what that means. And that changes too, understanding the importance of where data online go and that in many ways they never disappear. And that depending on what you're doing online, that can show up in your job search or what you're posting out there, and putting information about like tagging yourself. That, if you're going to go on a trip somewhere, don't put all these photos out there while you're on the trip. Telling people you're not at home.
Right?
Basic
Hey, I'm
things
leaving
like
town. Come rob my house.
Yeah, So, but again, I think that's a great question because when you're talking to younger people or any group that's different from your own particular demographic, it's important often to try to get other people that understand, that do have more experience with them, to be able to help share or say that same message to them. So if I go to a school, like I speak at a lot of like high schools, I spoke at Wynn, Arkansas, for instance, and some other places here in town in Little Rock. If you're giving a message, if you're providing materials, if other people are still conveying that same message, because somebody might look at someone just comes in, bunch of degrees, and think that I just think I'm some kind of know-it-all. But if they're also hearing other people share their stories, and after I'm gone, they're given material and say, here's what Dr. Montague was talking about, or here's an assignment. And I see that happening even at the grade school level, because we've done a lot of virtual talks with students about all types of things. And I just tell you, I cannot say enough about the ingenuity, especially with the pandemic, the ingenuity of the teachers, K through 12 and higher ed.
Online learning.
To try to learn how to reach their students, not only about the academic part, but about the socialization part as well. And I just think that's something that's really not mentioned enough, but I think it's as an educator, I think that's something very real.
Oh, thank you for giving a shout out to teachers. God love all of them. What are your thoughts about the Idaho 4? That guy was a criminal science major. So now that you're a teacher that teaches criminal science, so do you look at some of your employees, some of your kids and go, you're a criminal and you're crazy and you need to get out of here and don't graduate
Start
him.
profiling.
Are you profiling your students? I would be.
Well, I think that, examples of that, I mean, unfortunately, for everyone that's watching this or listening knows that the number of violent incidents in general, but especially shootings, mass shootings, is just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous, and it's on the rise. I think what it means is
this is stabbing, though.
Yeah,
they were stabbed. What does that mean, Mr. Criminologist?
Well, I think what I think is important about that is that I think what it means is we all need to try to understand, to be aware, situationally aware. And that goes back to your other question before about what would I tell my child? You know, being situationally aware is something that most people don't want to think about. If you think about, I'm in the safety of the mall, or I'm in the safety of, you know, this church group, or I'm in the safety of my school, or some people don't want to feel like they need to even think about their surroundings and things of that nature. It doesn't mean you have to be paranoid.
They were safety in their house.
Yeah, but I mean, there needs to be, I think, like for instance, if I were a student and living somewhere, with others, we'd have to have some discussion about what are we doing as a group in terms of locking the doors, making sure we're doing, and I'm not faulting anybody for anything, but I'm saying those discussions and how to deal with those scenarios, just like in K through 12, they're doing these drills on how to deal with these scenarios. So whether it's a gun, whether it's a knife, whether, you know, a knife is a very up close and personal thing.
That's what I'm asking you, Dr. Criminology. What was the deal with the knife and only 4 out of the 6 people were killed? What's your thoughts on that? I know you thought something.
Well, I don't want to put my personal thoughts out there about that. I want to see what the evidence brings.
And they're being so close-mouthed about the evidence too.
Yeah,
you think he did it?
I think that whenever there's an ongoing investigation and looking through records and material, it's very important to really give those involved the agency they need to be able to do a thorough job of that. And I certainly would not want to potentially taint what they're doing.
All right, last question, and then we're going. I know I've drugged this out a long time. All right. Humans are so fascinated with crime shows. I mean, how many crime shows are on TV? If my husband watches one more crime show where they stab people and kill people, I'm just going to kill myself. I just can't watch it. So,
I mean, speaking of time, if I could say it, speaking of TV shows, I remember when I was with the Assassination Board, the hot show at the time was the X-Files. And people asked me, and I would always say, my life is like the X-Files every day.
That was going to be my question. Are any of them like that? Are they really like, is the X-Files right?
I mean, I would just say I dealt with some me and my colleagues, and I dealt with some very strange circumstances during the time, at least my time during the Assassination Board. I can definitely say that was one of the most interesting experiences I've ever had in my life.
What do you watch now?
Fortunate. I watch some reality shows. I watch game shows.
Crime shows.
No crime shows.
Oh, I've watched Law and Order. I watched Law and Order.
Everybody watches Law and Order.
That's funny.
I watched Law and Order.
Just like everybody else.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it
I'm
real?
not that special.
Is it? Yeah, you are. Is it kind of true? Law and Order? Is it kind of true a little bit?
The complexity of oh my gosh, yes, there's so much complexity out there. I mean, one thing that's not true is the belief that, I forgot which show it used to be, maybe it was CSI, one of those, where it just seemed to the viewer that they automatically get DNA evidence immediately in this fancy computer. Nobody's rolling around in the fancy Hummer and things. Maybe there are a few out there, but they're very few in terms of doing that kind of work. And there actually been some news articles I think one was called the CSI Effect. And that's talking about the problem because some juries, people sitting on juries, not knowing the realities of a real civil or criminal investigation, just assume that what they see on TV is actually real. That it's so easy. And if you don't have all these meticulous records with so much information and why did it take so long?
So is DNA not dependable?
Oh, I think DNA is dependable. I think some of the question that some people, what I'm getting at is that some people might believe, unfortunately, that it's just a very straightforward process to be able to
get one piece of evidence and then everything ties up in a nice little bow at the end.
And there's enough resources to just automatically test every single thing right away.
Oh, resources.
And so, and as a result, if that doesn't happen right away, if it took an extra few days or weeks, do they somehow question the validity of what was done? And I think that's unfortunate because, when you're talking about doing any type of work, even right now, pandemic, you can't find people to work.
Yeah.
Jobs, it's hard.
Right.
Just the same thing for every type of organization, including law enforcement.
Just
So if
takes
you're
time
on
and
a jury,
resources.
just give them a break and give them some time to collect all the information. So that's
Yeah.
what we need to do with the Idaho 4s, just give them some time to collect information. Well, I am curious. I'm very curious. Anyway,
She has
I have
even more unanswered questions.
more.
And flags.
And
flag.
these are for you. Thank you, Dr. Montague, for coming on. Really? These are your flags. So I tried to figure out every place you've ever lived, and you've lived a lot. So there's Arkansas, there's Maryland,
Yeah.
there's D.C.
Yeah.
And
that's
this is New Jersey, I think.
Yes.
Have you?
Oh.
Did I get them all?
Yes, you did. Oh my God. Thank you so much. Wow.
I
Okay, this
know.
means a lot. Oh my goodness.
And that's going to look great on your desk at the college.
Oh, well, you know what? It's so funny that I'm in the office of the provost. I'm the executive vice chancellor and provost for the University of Arkansas Little Rock. And I have so much memorabilia, like law enforcement stuff. People come in my office and say, "Oh, it's like a museum in here," And I'm going to proudly display this because it has. I came to visit Flag and Banner as a child.
Oh, yeah,
yeah.
tell everybody our story.
And I remember being so impressed. I believe I was with my great uncle Jones. And I don't have any actual aunts or uncles because my mother was an only and my father was an only, Yeah. So, and I would come to Arkansas, and I remember we used to go to Hogman's Hog Pen, and we used to go to Flag and Banner, and I forgot exactly what we were looking for specifically, but I remember being with my mother that day, and so when I saw the invite for this, I was just blown away. I said, "Oh my God, that's where I went as a child." And to get this as a memento, you have no idea how much this means to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you for telling me that
Yes.
story.
Awesome. You need to
I
come,
love this.
you
New
need to come back
Jersey.
now. We've done a lot of good work renovating a lot of that building and restoring a lot of that historic ballroom on top.
Okay.
You need to come see it. We'll give you a tour.
I would love that.
You got my email, my cell phone. Call me. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
I loved it. In closing, to our listeners, thank you for spending time with us. We hope you've heard or learned something that's been inspiring or enlightening, and that whatever it is, will help you up your life, your independence, or your business. I'm Kerry McCoy, and I'll see you next time on Up in Your Business. Until then, be brave and keep it up.
If you like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking on the picture in the center of the screen. For more of Kerry's interviews, click either video on the right of the screen. And as always, thank you for watching.